name is Lorraine Shepard, and I thought it would be very nice for the future generations to know a little bit about the grandparents, where they came from, because they were from Europe, and some of the things that I remember hearing. My father came over, I found out in recent years, not through Ellis Island, but because it was England, he came over through Halifax and came over the border. Whether it was legal or whatever, I don't know. But when he came to America, he got married and had 3 children. And he lived in the neighborhood where my mother was with her marriage, and his wife died. And I didn't know too much about my father. I didn't ever find out the name of the city he came from or anything like that. I know that he and his family came from Latvia, and they went to England, and he decided to stay in England, and that's where he learned how to speak English, so he had just a tad of an English accent. I think it said on my birth certificate that he was a tailor. But in those days, you know, there wasn't college for him or anything, and he did what he had to do. When he was in England, he was very strong. He was a wrestler, which is hysterical, I think, you know. But he was strong, and he was able to do that. He was a bit of a ladies' man, I know that, even when they were married. They did separate when I was a baby, or maybe not even born yet. But they got back together. They were married 25 years before he died. And my father had a huge family, and all of them had a lot of kids. So there were many, many cousins from that side. But I must say that some of them were old enough to be grandparents to me, because he was old, and he had an even older sister who lived here in Chicago and had children. So it's an unbelievably large family, but totally out of touch with that side. Picture of my father. I think this may have even been taken in England. He's wearing, very natty. He was a very sharp dresser. And he was short, but he had a wide neck. He was a good looking man.
How short was he?
Well, he was short. I mean, he wasn't really tall, you know. A lot of Jewish men are not very tall. But you have to understand that I don't think I ever knew him when he looked, either of them looked like that. My mother was 48 and he was 56 when I was born. So I was a change of life baby. And they were such old people. They were like grandparents to me. All my friends had young parents. I always thought I was adopted, that perhaps one of my sisters had had me out of wedlock. You know, being young, you like to be kind of romantic in your dreams. But it wasn't true. I was definitely one of their children.
Your dad died at home?
My dad died at home. That was the first time I'd ever seen anyone die. It was very frightening. And it was a Shabbos on a Saturday afternoon, and they never came for him until at night. So his body stayed in the bedroom, all that. It was very difficult. But we sat Shiva in those days for a whole week, and all the aunts, his sisters, came over and sat at our house. And they'd cover the mirrors. You'd sit on wooden chairs, wooden benches, boxes. I don't know. It was pretty old-fashioned. But that was the way it was done. That was hard. It was a hard age. I was 13, and I think I was just going into high school. I was in high school. And it was during Christmas vacation, because he died on the 29th of December and was buried on New Year's Eve.
Oh.
So when I came back to school, I had one of those ribbons that are cut, and I remember one teacher, my English teacher, was Jewish, and she said to me, "What happened? Who died?" You know, there were Jewish teachers, there were Jewish children. It was very friendly, and to grow up in that kind of environment, go to school in that kind of environment. But now I'd like to switch back to my mother. She came from Poland, an area called Galicia, and was referred to as the Galicianer. And she came from a very large family. There were 11 children, and she was the first daughter. And when she was 15, There were no Jewish people around for her to marry, so they thought it'd be best if she would go to America. And she had a brother living in New York, so that's where they sent her. She came in right before the turn of the century. My mother, when she came over, I think she used to be a babysitter or something because, she didn't even know English. And she did go to schools, and she did know how to read, and she went to school in Europe. So she was not a dummy, she really took to that. And when she came here, she went to the Jane Addams home or school, and that's where a lot of these immigrants went to learn how to read and write. When my mother was young and living here in the States and had this business and had a little money, she sent for a lot of her relatives. She sent for 2 sisters who wound up living in New York, and then she sent for 2 other sisters here in Chicago. When she sent for the last one, she had put a name on of one of her sisters, and when the papers came to their hometown, her sister was getting married and decided she didn't want to come. So my Aunt Pearl, who was the last one, came instead. And ultimately, this aunt who didn't come and the rest of the family, many of the family, perished in the Second World War and the Holocaust. But that's the way the ball bounces, She lived in New York for a little while, and then she came to Chicago. I knew that my mother lived behind the store. It was a hardware store, and she had 6 children. My sister Helen was the eldest and the only girl, and she wound up taking care of the children all the time. And it was really hard for her, and when she did get married in later life, she had only one child. She had a daughter, and she said she'd taken care of kids all her life. That's all she wanted was one of her own. And that was the end. It was hard. They used to scrub wooden floors in the back on their hands and knees. It was a hard life. But anyway, my mother became widowed. And she and my father knew each other and decided to marry. He needed someone to take care of his children, and she needed someone to help her in the store. So I don't think it was a marriage made in heaven, but they got together, and after a while they had 3 more, and I am the last of the 3. But my mother held back. It was very hard. But there were stories that explained why she was the way she was. When she was young, her parents let her go out with the cows somewhere in the woods, because they lived in the woods somewhere in a small area, and she fell asleep, and at night she hears horseback riding, coming at her near the road. And they were Cossacks from the Russian Cossacks that used to come into the villages and maybe bother the Jewish people in their ghettos. She just narrowly escaped being run over, And I said to her once, how did your parents allow you? Didn't they worry where you were? You didn't come back because you fell asleep with the cows all night? It was such a different life. And when she finally they decided that she should come to America, her father, not her mother, because she was home with other babies and too busy, her father took her to the train. And being religious Jews, a man does not touch a woman who could possibly be having her period, and they never discussed things like that. She was 15, but she still had never gotten her period. Nevertheless, when she left, he never embraced her, never kissed her goodbye. She never saw him again. How do you expect someone like that to be openly affectionate when they never had any? She was wonderful with little babies because they needed her, they were cuddly, but when you got to a certain age, she kept you at a distance. But on the other hand, my father was very affectionate, and he apparently gave me whatever I needed from her. But after he was gone, she and I were alone a lot, and I was very close to her. When she left her apartment and we all got married and went away, she moved as a boarder, as a roomer in someone else's home. And I had a car of my own, and I used to go get her. She'd call me up in the morning. Every day I spoke to her on the phone. She'd call me in the morning, and she would say, I have nothing to do today. I said, Ma, I'll come and get you. And it was good for me, too, because she'd babysit, and I was able to go out. But she was very close to the grandkids, to my children when they were little. And Randy, I think, was 3 when she died. And that was tough. I was very young. She died in 1965 on the 2nd anniversary of Kennedy's assassination. I always remember that, November 22nd. And for a long time, I want to go to the telephone and call her. I hear people say that when their parents die. They want to pick up the phone and call and tell them what's happening, and then all of a sudden you remember they're not there anymore. My father's children were Nate, then Bertie, then Molly. Their last name was Cohn. My mother was a Marks, and that wasn't her married name. That was her married name. Her name at birth was Greisman, and she had the one girl, Helen. Then came 5 boys: Milt, Jake, Izzy, Allie, and Georgie. And they got together with 9 children and lived together like that. It must have been madness. But they did have 3 more children. By that time, I think they had lost the store and they moved further west to the west side. They had Gertie, she was the first one, then Esther, and then me. We lived on the west side and had a very, very fun upbringing, and it was sort of a ghetto. And we lived in 3 different apartment buildings. And by the time I got to the last one, we stayed there a long time. And at the time, it was a great place to live. It was sort of a Jewish ghetto, but it was fine. We lived near a main street, and you'd walk up and down the street and meet all kinds of people you knew. We took streetcars or buses to the high school and walked home on a nice day. It was maybe 2 miles or more. Life was very simple. My mother would send me after school to the grocery store, and the grocery was next to the fish store, next to the meat store, then the bakery, and that was the way we lived. You'd stop in each store and get the little bit that you needed, and everything was fresh. And at night, we would play outside, and in the summertime, we would be allowed to stay out as long as we came home when it was dark. And we played a lot outside, and we lived in a neighborhood with many apartments, so we had a lot of friends and played games out on the street, kick the can and hide, relivio, all kinds of things like that, and we just had a wonderful time. And the high school that I went to was also very, very friendly. You sort of knew everybody that you passed in the halls, and it was probably the best time of my life, those years in high school. Very social, and made a lot of friends, many of whom I still have. And it was just fun growing up, stuff, you know. And there was very little Yiddish spoken in our home. My mother and father would speak to each other, but not enough for us to, except to learn a word here and there and their meanings. I could never speak sentences. So, though many people I knew young people would go to a Jewish theater and stuff, I could never do that because I didn't know what anyone was talking about. Now, when I was young, my mother sent me to Cheder, which was a Jewish school, not Hebrew. And I learned how to write my name, Leah, which was my Yiddish name, Leah Cohn, but I could not tell what the rabbi was saying because he only spoke in Yiddish. And after a while I quit because the frustration was unbelievable. So that was as far as I got. The house was what we call gliklach. It was always full of food in the kitchen being cooked. There were always friends staying over. or dropping in. It was always a full house, and it was wonderful, which is probably why it doesn't upset me when I have a house full of company, because I'm just used to that, and I've always loved it. And it was so different. You know, we all lived on the West Side, and you knew everybody's family. When they married into another family, you just got to know their parents and sisters and brothers and uncles and cousins. And our world, the family, was large and expansive, and it was wonderful. And we knew everybody. It's so different today. People are so much more isolated today, and it was just a wonderful way to grow up. I mean, my feelings of my childhood are very gay, very happy, and full of memories, fond memories. When the boys were younger, they worked, and they brought in money, and somehow or another, we always had enough money for food on the table. But we didn't have much else. And I had one of my brothers, my brother Jake, had a store, and I was 12 years old, and I went to work for him. And he let me stay there and be in charge when he'd go out to buy merchandise, which is so hard to believe that at the age of 12, I ran his store. I took cash, and I took care of all the customers. He paid me $5 for Saturday and $5 for Sunday. And out of that money, I bought my own clothes. And once my mother saw that I could earn my own living, I never got another cent from her. And then when I was 14, I went to work in a store selling clothing, because they kind of knew that you weren't 16, but they didn't care, and nobody kind of watched them. And maybe I was a little mature, but I mean, I could handle cash and I could do the work, and I always made money. In high school, I could not always attend a lot of football games and baseball games and basketball games because I was working after school. But I did the best I can, and I don't really regret it now. It made me very independent, and I think it added a lot to my character. But yes, we were poor. And I always say there was no place to go but up, because none of us, all of us on the West Side, had nothing. And I think that overall, there were a great deal of us in that generation who did very well financially, who went into businesses. Not all of us, hardly any of us went to college. We couldn't afford it. And the family needed us to go to work after school. So in high school, I took no courses for college. I took business courses. I learned typing and shorthand and stuff like that, and I was ready at graduation to go out and get a job, which I did. I worked in a couple of different offices, bookkeeping, things like that, which I'm doing now at home for us because I've been very well prepared. So yes, we were poor, but we were happy. I never felt terribly deprived.
How about after your father died? Was money tighter then?
Well, I think that everybody helped out. My mother did collect Social Security, however little it was, till I was 18. And I worked. And the boys, there were two of my brothers who married late, and they lived at home. So in the apartment that we had, which was a very long apartment with a sun parlor in the front and a sleeping porch in the back and 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom that we all shared. And they worked and they brought in money. They gave my mother money. There was just never a lot, but I never felt that we were that poor. We always had food to eat. So that part was important. And I bought my own clothes. That was the way it was. Never felt sorry for myself.
Did you make clothes for yourself too?
I know. I learned to knit when I was a kid, but I never really accomplished very much till I got to be a grown-up. We did have a sewing machine that belonged to my mother or father, both. And it had a treadle, and when you spun the wheel, you took your foot and you pedaled it, treadled it, and that's what made the stitches. And one day things became more modern, and they were taking these old sewing machines and making them into electric by putting on some wires, and you used your knee to push against it to make it go. And I said to my mother, if I pay to have this machine modernized, when I get married, can I take it with me? She said, sure. So that was my first sewing machine. And I learned how to sew because both of them could sew, and they sort of showed me, and that was it. And of course, in school, in grammar school, I think you took a course where you learned how to make, maybe you made a mitt for the oven or some little thing like that. And I learned. But not all of, like Esther and Gertie were not at all that handy. Gertie a little, Esther terrible. I tried to teach her how to knit so many times, and she never could do it. My sister Esther was always made to schlep me along wherever she went. My mother would say, take Lorraine, take Lorraine. And she used to resent it a lot, but I try to be good so that she wouldn't resent it because I had a good time. And as a result, I knew all her friends, all the guys she hung out with at school. And when they would bump into her years later, they'd always say, how's Lorraine? Because I was so much a part of their life, and they were part of mine. And when Esther went with her husband, Jerry, he had a Plymouth coupe that had a rumble seat in the back. And when they had to schlep me everywhere, they'd stick me in the rumble seat. Well, I think they only had room for two in the front anyway. But in later years, she apologized to me for pushing me off and being by myself. And I said to her, are you kidding? I loved it. I said the wind would ruffle my hair, you know, just like if you'd be in a convertible. And I would have a lot of imagination and, you know, whatever. I was just so used to being a tag-along, you know. And I'm sure it must have been hard for her because she was with her boyfriend. But I didn't interfere. I just was grateful that I didn't have to stay home and do nothing because I was the last one and there was nobody around. Esther worked for a little while, and then she got pregnant when her husband came home from the service. She got pregnant with Mark, and she was pregnant when my father died. And I remember that I was holding Sharon and looking out the window waiting for her to come back because they didn't want her to see that the fire department's pull motor was out in front because she was pregnant. My mother was afraid maybe she'd get scared and lose the baby.
So your next older sibling was 5 years older than you?
5.5, and then Gertie
And
was
then the next
9.5 years older than me. Yeah, and she was so grown up that we weren't good friends, you know. But there were things, I have some stories to tell about her that were part of my childhood. When she and her girlfriend took me out one day for lunch downtown to a nice little restaurant. It was a treat, and they smoked cigarettes. And they made me promise not to tell because they must have been, maybe I was 5, she was 15. And it was a secret that I kept, always kept. And I was so proud of myself because I never told. And she was like an aunt to me, or, you know, one of those kind of sisters that you're not chummy with, but that does nice things for you. She would bring me a Valentine bunny made of chocolate with my name on it or something, you know, and it was just a really nice treat.
How old was Gertie when she got married?
Gertie was, I think, 19, and when she got married in our home, and in the living room we had lace curtains, and they put the chairs up and had an aisle in the middle, and the way we sat, my brother Jake, who was a tease, took my hair and wrapped it in the lace curtains so that when I get up it would pull. I mean, the little things like that I remembered. Then afterwards they all went out to see Danny Thomas, who was appearing at the 5100 Club in Chicago. That was his beginning, and he was there and they loved him. He was a comedian and started out there, and the grown-ups went, and the younger kids, a couple of my nieces and stuff, we all slept over, they slept over, and we just had a ball. It was a funny kind of wedding, you know, but that was what you could afford. And she moved away, but not at first. No, I went during the war, and they lived in a bedroom in our house. And Esther was married to her first husband, Lefty, and he was in the service. She had Sharon, and I think 1 or 2 of the boys might have been already in the service. So they lived in the different bedrooms. I mean, you know, whoever. I slept in a dining room for years on a hide-a-bed. And it's the way it was, you know, never thought about it much. Let me think what else I can tell you. Gertie moved to New York when she was pregnant with her third child, Arden. No, she waited for the baby to be born, and then she left. And my mother went with her to help, and my mother had never flown before. That was her first time. And trying to think how old. Marcy was born in '53. I was pregnant, and I felt so sad that she was moving and wouldn't see my little girl, and that I wouldn't watch her little girl grow up, because she had two others that were older that were over at the house all the time. So we were very close. But we managed to go back and forth. She'd come and stay at my house when I got married to Dad. We had a 3-bedroom home, and we'd get some folding beds and whatever, and they'd stay over. And we remained in contact for years, and I still talk to her kids and see them when I can.
But she's gone now, what, a year?
Gertie's grown more. I think it's 2 years. And last time we were in New York, Gertie had a birthday, her 85th, I think. And we went there to see her, Esther and her husband, and Dad and I. And she had the beginnings of Alzheimer's and hadn't been in a very good frame of mind. But when we came, being from the past, it was wonderful, because she came to life, and she was her old self there for a while, and her kids were ever so grateful that we had come, because they got their mother back for a little while, and we were so glad we did that. And then she died about a year later, or less. And now it's just Esther and I, and Esther's 85, I think I mentioned that. But it's hard to, when I tell people how big a family I come from, they're always so surprised, because people didn't have that many children anymore. And it's like I was raised with a different generation than my friends, because they came from families that married after the Depression. They only wanted 1 or 2 children. They lived in small apartments. And years ago, after I had met up again with my friends from grammar school, they came over to the house, and we all knew each other's mothers, of course. We had a club, and we used to meet all the time. And we all confessed about feelings that we had, and I said how jealous I was, because they had small apartments and their own bedroom or something, you know. And they said, oh, we used to love to come to your house. It was always so many people there and so much fun. And you know, you always envy what you don't have, and you don't realize how good off you were. They wish that they could have had what I had, and I wanted what they had, naturally. So that was enlightening. That was fun. Now some of them are gone too. A lot of my friends are gone, because we're getting older. And that's all the more reason that I wanted to have this for anyone in the family who wanted to hear the story, so that their kids and their children can always know where the parents came from.